The distant wail of a train whistle pierced the early morning mist as Eleanor Sinclair stepped onto the platform of Sierra Vista, Arizona Territory, in the spring of 1883, her gloved hands clutching a worn leather valise containing everything she owned in the world. The train that had carried her from Boston across the vast expanse of America hissed and belched steam behind her, as if eager to continue its journey without the burden of her broken heart. Eleanor's emerald eyes, once bright with hope and love, now seemed dulled by experience as she surveyed the dusty main street of the frontier town. Sierra Vista was nothing like the sophisticated Boston society she'd left behind, and that was precisely why she had chosen it. 3,000 miles seemed an appropriate distance to put between herself and Thomas Holloway, the man who had promised her the world and delivered only betrayal. "Miss, you needing assistance?" A gruff voice startled Eleanor from her thoughts. She turned to see a weathered station master eyeing her with curiosity. "I'm fine, thank you. Could you direct me to Widow Gardner's boarding house?" "End of Main Street, madam. White house with blue shutters. Can't miss it." He tipped his hat respectfully. Eleanor nodded her thanks and began the walk down the dirt road that constituted Sierra Vista's main thoroughfare. Her sensible traveling boots, already coated with dust, were a stark contrast to the delicate slippers she'd worn to Boston's elegant balls. But those days were behind her now, along with her naive belief in romantic love. Sierra Vista was bustling despite the early hour. Cowboys lounged outside the saloon, merchants arranged their wares, and women hurried about their morning errands. Eleanor felt the curious stares of the townspeople as she passed. A new face, especially a young, unmarried woman of obvious refinement, was cause for interest in a town like this. The weight of her valise grew with each step, but Eleanor refused to show any sign of weakness. She had come west to be the new schoolteacher, a position secured through her father's distant connection to the town's mayor. Teaching had always been her passion, even when Thomas had laughed at the idea, insisting that as his wife, she would have no need for employment. Wife. The word felt bitter in her mind. She would never be anyone's wife now. She had learned her lesson about trusting a man's honeyed words and promises of devotion. Eleanor was so lost in her bitter thoughts that she failed to notice the commotion ahead until it was too late. A massive dappled gray stallion reared up directly in her path, its massive hooves pawing the air dangerously close to her face. Eleanor stumbled backward, dropping her valise as she fell hard onto the dusty street. "Whoa, thunder! Easy, boy!" A deep voice commanded, and almost immediately the horse settled, though it continued to snort and prance nervously. Eleanor looked up, temporarily blinded by the morning sun silhouetting the rider who had dismounted and was now extending a hand toward her. As her vision cleared, she found herself staring into the most intensely blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face partially hidden by a day's worth of stubble. "My apologies, madam. Thunder here gets spooked by trains." The man's voice was rich and deep, with the subtle drawl of the West. "Are you hurt?" Eleanor ignored his outstretched hand and pushed herself to her feet, brushing dust from her traveling dress with as much dignity as she could muster. "I'm quite all right, thank you," she said stiffly. The man raised an eyebrow at her cool tone but withdrew his hand without comment. He stooped to retrieve her fallen valise instead. "You must be the new schoolteacher." Eleanor reached for her bag. "I am, and you are, Kieran O'Malley. I ranch outside of town." He held onto the valise a moment longer than necessary when she tried to take it, forcing her to meet his gaze. "Welcome to Sierra Vista, Miss Sinclair. Eleanor Sinclair." She tugged the bag from his grasp. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. O'Malley, but I must be going." A smile played at the corners of his mouth, crinkling the skin around those startling blue eyes. "Be careful in this town, Miss Sinclair. Not everyone is as harmless as I am." Eleanor drew herself up to her full height, which still left her looking up at him. "I assure you, Mr. O'Malley, I am quite capable of taking care of myself." He tipped his hat, amusement evident in his expression. "I don't doubt it for a second, schoolteacher." Eleanor turned away, determined to put as much distance between herself and the handsome cowboy as possible. Men like Kieran O'Malley were precisely the kind of distraction she didn't need. Charming, confident, and undoubtedly unreliable. Behind her, she heard him call out, "School term starts Monday, right? I'll bring my sister's kids by." Eleanor didn't turn around but raised a hand in acknowledgement. Sierra Vista was small enough that she'd likely see plenty of Kieran O'Malley, whether she wanted to or not. The thought brought a frown to her face as she continued toward the boarding house. She hadn't come to the Arizona territory looking for complications, especially not complications in the form of blue-eyed cowboys with disarming smiles. Widow Gardner's boarding house proved to be exactly as described, a tidy white clapboard structure with freshly painted blue shutters that stood out among the weathered buildings of Sierra Vista. It appeared to be the only building on the street that didn't have a fine layer of dust coating its exterior. Eleanor knocked on the front door, and it swung open almost immediately to reveal a plump, gray-haired woman with kind eyes and flour-dusted hands. "Miss Sinclair, right on time." "I'm Martha Gardner." The woman wiped her hands on her apron before ushering Eleanor inside. Come in, come in. You must be exhausted after such a journey." The interior of the boarding house was spotlessly clean and modestly furnished. The scent of fresh, baked bread and coffee filled the air, making Eleanor suddenly aware of how hungry she was. "I've put you in the room at the top of the stairs, best one in the house," Martha chattered as she led Eleanor up the narrow staircase. "Gets the morning light and has a fine view of the mountains. Bathrooms down the hall. We've got indoor plumbing, which is more than most can say in Sierra Vista. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6, and I don't mind if you make yourself a sandwich for lunch from the kitchen." The room was small but comfortable, with a narrow bed covered in a colorful quilt, a pine dresser, a washstand, and a rocking chair by the window. It was far simpler than her bedroom in Boston, but Eleanor found she preferred its honest plainness to the ornate furnishings of her past life. "It's perfect, Mrs. Gardner, thank you." "Martha, please. We don't stand on ceremony much out here." The older woman smiled warmly. "Rest up now. Mayor Jenkins wants to meet you tomorrow morning at 9 to show you the schoolhouse. And tonight, you'll take dinner with us. My boarders and a few townsfolk are eager to meet you." After Martha left, Eleanor sank onto the bed, the exhaustion of her journey finally catching up with her. She hadn't slept properly in days, too anxious about leaving everything she knew behind. She unpacked her few belongings, carefully hanging her dresses in the small wardrobe and placing her father's pocket watch on the bedside table. The gold timepiece was one of the few valuable things she'd kept after selling most of her possessions to fund her journey west. Her father had been gone 3 years now, and her mother even longer. With no siblings and only distant relatives who had made it clear they considered her a burden, Eleanor had been vulnerable to Thomas's charm and attention. How easily he had won her trust with his promises and poetry. "Never again," she whispered to the empty room. The western frontier was a place for new beginnings, and hers would be built on self-reliance, not romantic notions. Eleanor washed the travel dust from her face and hands, changed into a fresh navy blue dress, and pinned her chestnut hair into a simple but neat arrangement. The schoolteacher of Sierra Vista needed to make a good impression, even if she was bone-weary. When she descended the stairs for dinner, the dining room was already half full. Conversation stopped as she entered, and Eleanor fought the urge to turn and flee back to her room. Instead, she lifted her chin and smiled politely. "Everyone, this is Miss Eleanor Sinclair, our new schoolteacher," Martha announced, guiding her to an empty chair. "Eleanor, these are my other boarders, Dr. Harrison Wells, Mr. Frederick Thompson, who runs the mercantile, and Mrs. Amelia Winters, our town seamstress." Each person nodded or murmured a greeting. Eleanor was about to respond when the front door opened, and a tall figure ducked through the entrance. "Sorry I'm late, Martha. Had to deal with a collapsed fence line," said a familiar voice that made Eleanor's stomach tighten inexplicably. Kieran O'Malley stood in the doorway, his hat in his hands, those blue eyes finding Eleanor's immediately. He looked different now, cleaned up, his dark hair damp from a recent washing, his jaw freshly shaven. The change did nothing to diminish his rugged appeal. "Mr. O'Malley, you're just in time to meet our new schoolteacher," Martha said. A slow smile spread across his face. "We've already had the pleasure of meeting, haven't we, Miss Sinclair?" All eyes turned to Eleanor, who felt heat rising to her cheeks. "Briefly," she acknowledged. "Mr. O'Malley's horse nearly trampled me this morning." There were a few chuckles around the table as Kieran took the empty seat directly across from Eleanor. "Thunder apologizes for the poor first impression," he said, his eyes twinkling. "Though I think it was the train whistle that deserves the blame." "You board here as well, Mr. O'Malley?" Eleanor asked, trying to keep her tone neutral despite her dismay at the prospect of daily encounters with the distractingly handsome Cowboy. He shook his head. "No, madam. My ranch is about 5 miles out, but Martha here makes the best chicken and dumplings in the territory, and she's kind enough to invite me for dinner when I'm in town on business." "Kieran's being modest," Martha said as she began serving the food. "He keeps this town fed with his beef and helps everyone who needs it. Last winter, he rode 15 miles in a blizzard to fetch Dr. Wells when the Miller baby was coming early." Eleanor watched as Kieran brushed off the praise, a faint flush coloring his tanned cheeks. Perhaps there was more to the man than his charming smile. Dinner conversation flowed easily, with the townsfolk eager to tell Eleanor about Sierra Vista and equally curious about her life in Boston. She answered their questions carefully, sharing her teaching experience and her interest in literature, but avoiding any mention of Thomas or her broken engagement. That wasn't information she cared to share with virtual strangers. Throughout the meal, she was acutely aware of Kieran's gaze on her. Whenever she looked up, those blue eyes were watching her with an interest that made her uncomfortable, not because it was unwelcome, but because part of her welcomed it far too much. "You'll have your work cut out for you with some of these ranch kids," Frederick Thompson was saying. "Half of them would rather be roping calves than learning their letters." "I'm sure Miss Sinclair is up to the challenge," Kieran said. "She strikes me as a woman who doesn't back down easily." Eleanor met his gaze directly. "You're right about that, Mr. O'Malley. I believe every child deserves an education, regardless of their circumstances or initial reluctance. Even the stubborn ones," he asked with a smile that suggested he wasn't just talking about children. "Especially the stubborn ones," she replied. "They often have the most to offer once they apply themselves." The conversation shifted to local affairs, the upcoming cattle drive, plans for expanding the church, and gossip about which young couples might announce engagements before the summer was out. Eleanor listened attentively, building a mental picture of her new community. After dinner, most of the boarders retreated to their rooms, but Eleanor found herself unable to face the prospect of lying awake with her thoughts. Instead, she stepped onto the front porch, breathing in the cool evening air. The sky above Sierra Vista was a vast canvas of stars unlike anything she'd seen in Boston, where city lights and coal smoke obscured much of the heavens. Beautiful, isn't it? Kieran's voice came from the shadowed corner of the porch. Eleanor stiffened, annoyed that her solitude had been interrupted. I didn't realize you were still here. He moved into the light spilling from the window, leaning against the porch railing. Just enjoying the night air before the ride home. He studied her face for a moment. You don't much care for company, do you, Miss Sinclair? I've had a long journey, Mr. O'Malley. I'm tired. Yet you're out here instead of resting. He looked up at the stars. Something keeping you from sleep? Eleanor considered dismissing him with a curt reply but found herself answering honestly instead. Everything is so different here. The sounds, the smells, even the air feels different in my lungs. Kieran nodded. Takes time to adjust. I remember when I first came west from New York. Couldn't sleep for a week, too quiet without all the city noise. You're from New York? Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. Despite his refined speech, everything about Kieran O'Malley screamed Western cowboy, born and raised in Hell's Kitchen. Came west after the war. He didn't specify which war, but the brief shadow that crossed his features suggested it was the one that had torn the nation apart. Found myself in Arizona territory, liked what I saw, and decided to stay. And became a rancher, Eleanor mused. Quite a change from city life. Best decision I ever made. His gaze returned to her face. What about you, Miss Sinclair? What brings a Boston lady to our little corner of nowhere? Eleanor looked away. A teaching position. And nothing else. His voice was gentle, probing. Nothing worth discussing with a stranger, Mr. O'Malley. Her tone made it clear the subject was closed. To her relief, he accepted the rebuff with a nod. Fair enough. He straightened up and reached for his hat. I should be heading back. Got an early start tomorrow. Eleanor felt a twinge of regret at having been so abrupt. Thank you for the welcome to Sierra Vista. Kieran settled his hat on his head, tipping it slightly in acknowledgement. Sleep well, Miss Sinclair. The West has a way of growing on you. He stepped off the porch and untied his horse from the hitching post. Eleanor watched as he swung effortlessly into the saddle, man and horse becoming one fluid silhouette against the star-filled sky. As he rode away, she found herself wondering what other depths lay beneath Kieran O'Malley's charming exterior. Then she firmly reminded herself that it didn't matter she hadn't come to Sierra Vista to be intrigued by blue-eyed cowboys, no matter how compelling they might be. The schoolhouse stood at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with rows of desks, a teacher's desk on a small platform, and a pot-bellied stove for heating. When Mayor Jenkins unlocked the door and showed Eleanor inside the next morning, she was pleasantly surprised by its condition. The floors were swept, the windows clean, and a new slate blackboard hung on the wall. Previous teacher left us at Christmas. Her mother took ill back east, the mayor explained. He was a portly man with impressive whiskers and an even more impressive gold watch chain stretched across his vest. We've had temporary folks filling in, but the children need consistency. Town council was mighty pleased when you accepted the position. Eleanor ran her hand along the teacher's desk, already envisioning how she would arrange her books and papers. How many students can I expect? About 25, ages 6 to 16. Some can only come when farm and ranch work allows, especially the older boys. Mayor Jenkins adjusted his spectacles. You'll have complete authority over the curriculum, of course, though we do expect the basics: reading, writing, arithmetic, history. And literature, Eleanor added. Stories help children understand the world. The mayor nodded indulgently. Whatever you think best, Miss Sinclair. School term starts Monday at 8 o'clock sharp. Any supplies you need, just see Thompson at the mercantile. The town has an account." After the mayor left, Eleanor spent several hours familiarizing herself with the schoolhouse, examining the small library of well-worn books, and making lists of supplies she would need. By the time she locked up and headed back toward the boarding house, her mind was buzzing with plans for lessons and activities. The weekend passed in a blur of preparations. Eleanor introduced herself to more townspeople, purchased fabric for new curtains for the schoolhouse, and began organizing her first week of lessons. She barely had time to think about Boston or Thomas, which was precisely what she had hoped for in coming west. On Sunday evening, Martha insisted she accompany the boarding house residents to church services, where Reverend Phillips introduced her to the congregation. Eleanor smiled and nodded politely as what seemed like the entire population of Sierra Vista filed past to welcome her. She was relieved when Kieran O'Malley didn't appear among the churchgoers, though she caught herself scanning the crowded pews more than once. Monday morning dawned clear and cool. Eleanor dressed with particular care in a high-necked white blouse and a sensible gray skirt, pinning her chestnut hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck. The schoolteacher needed to project authority, especially on her first day. She arrived at the schoolhouse an hour early, arranging her desk and writing a welcome message on the blackboard. As 8 o'clock approached, children began arriving, some alone, some in groups of siblings, some accompanied by parents eager to meet the new teacher. The morning passed in a whirlwind of introductions, assessments of reading abilities, and establishing classroom procedures. Eleanor was impressed by the general level of enthusiasm, though a few of the older boys clearly viewed school as an unwelcome interruption to their real lives on the ranches. Just after noon, as the children were eating their lunches in the schoolyard, the sound of approaching horses drew Eleanor's attention. 3 riders approached a man, a woman, and between them, a girl of about 10 with flame-red hair in 2 long braids. Eleanor recognized the lead rider immediately. Kieran O'Malley sat tall in the saddle, looking every inch the capable rancher in his work clothes and well-worn hat. The woman beside him was clearly his sister, sharing the same striking blue eyes and dark hair, though her complexion was fairer, less weathered by the elements. "Miss Sinclair," Kieran called as he dismounted. "Hope we're not too late." "This is my sister, Sarah Jenkins, the mayor's daughter-in-law, and my niece, Rebecca." Eleanor nodded politely. "Not at all. We're just finishing lunch." Sarah Jenkins dismounted gracefully and extended a gloved hand. "Pleasure to meet you, Miss Sinclair. We've heard wonderful things already." Rebecca remained on her pony, eyeing Eleanor with undisguised wariness. The child was dressed practically in a simple dress and boots, with a small leather satchel tied to her saddle. "Rebecca missed the morning session because we had some trouble with the new foal," Sarah explained. "I hope that's all right. Of course, we're still getting settled today." Eleanor turned her attention to the girl. "I'm very pleased to meet you, Rebecca. Would you like to join the other children for the afternoon?" The girl glanced at her uncle, who gave her an encouraging nod. With obvious reluctance, she slid from her pony and took the satchel her mother handed her. "Be good now, Rebecca," Sarah said. "Uncle Kieran will pick you up after school." Eleanor's eyes snapped to Kieran's face. "You will," he shrugged. "Sarah needs to get back to help with the foal, and I've got business in town later anyway." "I see." Eleanor wasn't sure why the prospect of seeing him again caused such a flutter in her stomach. "Well, Rebecca, shall we introduce you to your classmates?" The girl nodded solemnly and followed Eleanor toward the schoolyard, where the other children were finishing their lunches. "Miss Sinclair," Kieran called after her. When she turned, he was grinning. "That color blue suits you." Eleanor blinked in confusion, then realized he was referring to her ribbon, the one splash of color in her otherwise austere outfit. "Thank you, Mr. O'Malley," she replied stiffly, then quickly ushered Rebecca toward the other children. The afternoon session went smoothly, with Rebecca proving to be a bright student despite her initial reluctance. When the final bell rang at 4 o'clock, the children gathered their belongings and streamed out of the schoolhouse, eager for freedom. Eleanor stood at the door, bidding each one goodbye, making mental notes about which students might need extra help and which would require more challenging material. Rebecca was the last to leave, carefully placing her slate and reader in her satchel. "Will we be reading stories, Miss Sinclair?" she asked suddenly. "My last teacher just made us do sums all day," Eleanor smiled. "We'll certainly be reading stories. Do you enjoy reading, Rebecca?" The girl nodded enthusiastically. "Uncle Kieran reads to me sometimes. He does all the different voices." Before Eleanor could process this surprising information, Kieran himself appeared in the schoolhouse doorway. "Ready to go, Becky." The girl ran to her uncle, who scooped her up as if she weighed nothing. "Miss Sinclair says we're going to read stories." Kieran glanced at Eleanor over his niece's head. "Is that so? Well, you're in luck. Miss Sinclair probably knows all the best stories from back east." Eleanor began gathering her own things, suddenly flustered by Kieran's presence in the small schoolroom. "I was just about to lock up, Mr. O'Malley." "No rush," he said easily, setting Rebecca down. "Take your time. Becky and I'll wait outside with the horses." When Eleanor finally emerged from the schoolhouse, having carefully organized her desk for the next day, she found Kieran leaning against the hitching post, watching as Rebecca patted her pony's neck. "Successful first day?" he asked. Eleanor nodded, locking the schoolhouse door. "The children seem eager to learn. That's half the battle. Even the stubborn ones." There was that smile again, the one that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "We'll see," she replied, unable to suppress her own small smile. "It's only the first day." Kieran helped Rebecca mount her pony before turning back to Eleanor. "Would you like a ride back to town? Thunder can easily carry two." The thought of sitting in the saddle with Kieran, her body pressed against his, sent a wave of heat through Eleanor that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. "No, thank you. I enjoy the walk. Suit yourself." He swung up onto his horse with the same fluid grace she'd admired before. "See you around, schoolteacher." Eleanor watched as they rode away, Rebecca chattering animatedly while Kieran listened with evident affection. The image of the tough cowboy reading bedtime stories, complete with different voices, was oddly endearing. The remainder of Eleanor's first week passed without further encounters with Kieran O'Malley. Rebecca arrived each morning with various cousins from neighboring ranches, delivered by different ranch hands, and was collected in the same way each afternoon. By Friday, Eleanor had established a routine and was feeling more confident about her place in Sierra Vista. The children were responding well to her teaching methods, and the parents she'd met seemed genuinely pleased with her approach. As she dismissed the class for the weekend, Rebecca lingered behind. "Miss Sinclair, my mama wants to know if you'd like to come to Sunday dinner at our ranch after church." Eleanor was taken aback by the invitation. "That's very kind of your mother, Rebecca. Uncle Kieran will come fetch you after services," the girl continued. "He says you probably haven't seen a real working ranch yet, and everybody should see one while they're in the territory." Did he indeed? Eleanor wasn't sure whether to be annoyed or amused by Kieran's presumption. "Well, please thank your mother for the invitation. I would be delighted to come." Rebecca beamed. "Uncle Kieran will be pleased. He says you're too cooped up in town." Before Eleanor could formulate a response to this, Rebecca darted out the door to where her cousin was waiting with their horses. On Sunday morning, Eleanor found herself taking extra care with her appearance. She chose her best dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her hair in a more becoming style than her usual severe schoolteacher's bun. When she caught herself dabbing a touch of rose water at her wrists and throat, she stopped abruptly, shocked by her own behavior. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to her reflection. "It's just Sunday dinner at a student's home." But when she exited the church after services to find Kieran waiting beside a smart buggy instead of his usual mount, her heart gave a traitorous little leap. He had dressed for the occasion as well, trading his usual working clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and what appeared to be newly polished boots. "Miss Sinclair," he greeted her, hat in hand. "Ready for your first ranch visit?" Eleanor accepted his hand as she climbed into the buggy, trying to ignore the warmth of his touch. "I'm looking forward to it, Mr. O'Malley. It's kind of your sister to include me." Kieran chuckled as he settled beside her and took up the reins. Truth be told, it was Becky's idea. "She's taken quite a shine to you. She's a bright girl, you must be proud of her." "That I am." His voice softened. "Sarah's done a fine job with her, especially after losing William." Eleanor glanced at his profile. "William, her husband, my brother-in-law, took a fall from a horse 2 years back, broke his neck." Kieran's jaw tightened briefly. "Sarah's been running the ranch herself since then, with some help from me and the hands." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly. "I didn't know." Kieran shrugged. "No reason you would. Sarah doesn't like folks feeling sorry for her. She's doing just fine on her own." There was genuine admiration in his voice, and Eleanor found herself warming to him even more for it. A man who respected a woman's strength and independence was rare indeed in her experience. The Jenkins Ranch was about 7 miles from town, nestled in a valley with a clear stream running through it. As they approached, Eleanor could see cattle grazing on the gentle slopes, a barn and several outbuildings, and a modest but well-maintained house with a wide porch. "It's beautiful," she said honestly. "Best piece of land in the territory," Kieran agreed, pride evident in his voice. "William and I bought neighboring parcels when we first came west, built everything from scratch. Your ranch is nearby, just over that ridge." He pointed to a line of hills to the north. "About 3 miles as the crow flies." As they pulled up to the house, Sarah came out onto the porch, wiping her hands on an apron. "You're just in time. Roast is almost ready." The house was warm and inviting, filled with simple but comfortable furnishings and the delicious aroma of cooking food. Rebecca greeted Eleanor excitedly, eager to show her teacher her books, her cat's new kittens, and the view from her bedroom window. Dinner was a relaxed affair, with Sarah serving a magnificent roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and an apple pie that had Eleanor closing her eyes in bliss at the first bite. "This is wonderful, Mrs. Jenkins," she said. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since Boston." Kieran supplied when she trailed off. Eleanor nodded. "My mother was an excellent cook. After she passed, we had a housekeeper, but it wasn't the same." "And there's no one else back in Boston?" Sarah asked gently. "No family waiting for your letters?" "No." Eleanor kept her eyes on her plate. "My father passed 3 years ago. There's no one else." A brief silence fell over the table before Sarah skillfully changed the subject to Rebecca's progress at school. Eleanor was grateful for the diversion and enthusiastically praised her students' work. After dinner, Sarah insisted on showing Eleanor around the ranch while Kieran and Rebecca took care of the dishes, an arrangement that surprised Eleanor, but seemed routine to the family. Kieran taught her that men are just as responsible for household chores as women, Sarah explained as they walked toward the barn. "My brother has some decidedly progressive views for a cowboy." "He's not what I expected," Eleanor admitted. Sarah smiled knowingly. Few men are, in my experience. Kieran may look like every other cowpoke in the territory, but he reads Shakespeare for pleasure and can recite Whitman from memory. Our father was a schoolteacher before he came west. This new information about Kieran added another layer to the complex picture Eleanor was forming of the man. No wonder his speech was more refined than most of the ranchers she'd met. The tour of the ranch was fascinating. Sarah was clearly knowledgeable and passionate about the operation, explaining their breeding program, pointing out recent improvements, and introducing Eleanor to several ranch hands who tipped their hats respectfully. When they returned to the house, they found Kieran and Rebecca on the porch, the girl curled against her uncle's side as he read aloud from a well-worn copy of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. He paused when he saw them, looking slightly embarrassed at being caught in such a domestic scene. "Don't stop on our account," Sarah said, settling into a rocking chair. Eleanor took the empty chair beside her, watching as Kieran returned to the story, his deep voice bringing the characters to life just as Rebecca had described. The girl was completely engrossed, and Eleanor found herself equally captivated, not just by the familiar tale but by the man reading it. The afternoon stretched pleasantly into early evening, with conversation flowing easily among the adults, while Rebecca played with the kittens she'd proudly presented to Eleanor earlier. When it was finally time to return to town, Eleanor was surprised by her reluctance to leave. "You must come again," Sarah insisted as they said their goodbyes. "Perhaps next Sunday." "I'd like that very much," Eleanor replied sincerely. The ride back to town was quieter, both Eleanor and Kieran lost in their own thoughts as the buggy rolled along the dusty road. The setting sun painted the landscape in shades of gold and purple, casting a dreamlike quality over the scene. "Thank you for today," Eleanor said eventually. "I enjoyed meeting your family." Kieran glanced at her, his expression soft in the fading light. "They liked you too, especially Becky. She's a special girl. She's had it rough losing her pa so young." Kieran's hands tightened briefly on the reins. "Sarah too, but they're strong, both of them." "Like someone else I'm beginning to know," Eleanor said before she could stop herself. Kieran's smile was slow and warm. "Careful, Miss Sinclair." That almost sounded like a compliment. Eleanor felt herself blushing and was grateful for the dimming light that hid her reaction. Perhaps it was Mr. O'Malley. They rode in companionable silence for a while longer before Kieran spoke again. "Would you tell me about Boston sometime? I've never been further east than St. Louis." The request was innocent enough, but Eleanor tensed immediately. "There's not much to tell." Kieran gave her a sidelong glance. "I doubt that very much. A woman doesn't travel all the way from Boston to Arizona territory without a story. Perhaps I don't wish to share mine." Her voice was cooler now. "Fair enough." He was quiet for a moment. "But if you ever do, I'm a good listener." The rest of the journey passed in silence, though not an uncomfortable one. When they reached the boarding house, Kieran helped Eleanor down from the buggy, his hands strong and steady at her waist. "Thank you again for the invitation," she said formally, stepping back from his touch. Kieran studied her face in the gathering darkness. "You know, Eleanor," he said, using her given name for the first time, "whatever happened back east, whatever drove you to run 3,000 miles, it doesn't define you, not unless you let it." Eleanor stiffened. "You presume too much, Mr. O'Malley." "Probably," he agreed with a small smile. "It's a bad habit of mine. Good night, schoolteacher." As she watched him drive away, Eleanor felt a confusing mixture of irritation and attraction. Kieran O'Malley was entirely too perceptive for her comfort. Yet his insight didn't feel like an invasion, but rather like a hand extended in understanding. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor found herself thinking about the day, the warmth of Sarah's welcome, Rebecca's excitement, and most disturbingly, the way Kieran's eyes had crinkled when he smiled at her over Rebecca's head as he read. It had been a long time since she'd felt part of a family gathering, and the experience had awakened an ache she'd tried hard to suppress. In Boston, she had imagined a future filled with similar scenes: a home, children, a husband who would read to them by the fire. Thomas had promised her all of that and more. His betrayal had shattered those dreams, leaving her determined never to be so vulnerable again. Yet here she was, barely a month in Sierra Vista, already feeling the dangerous pull of those same desires. Worse, they were now associated with a specific face, one with startlingly blue eyes and a smile that made her forget her carefully constructed defenses. "Don't be a fool," she whispered to herself in the darkness. "You've learned this lesson already." But as sleep finally claimed her, Eleanor's dreams were filled with sun-drenched ranches, the laughter of children, and a deep voice reading stories by firelight. The following weeks fell into a comfortable routine. Eleanor threw herself into her teaching duties, finding genuine satisfaction in her students' progress. She took her meals at the boarding house, attended church services, and gradually became integrated into the small community of Sierra Vista. True to Sarah's invitation, Eleanor joined the Jenkins family for Sunday dinner the following weekend and the one after that. Each visit deepened her appreciation for the simple, honest lifestyle of the ranch and the people who called it home. She found herself looking forward to these outings with an eagerness that both pleased and alarmed her. Kieran was often present at these gatherings, sometimes arriving directly from his own ranch, sometimes escorting Eleanor from town. Their conversations gradually became easier, less guarded on Eleanor's part, though she still deflected any questions about her life before Sierra Vista. One Sunday in late April, after nearly 2 months in Arizona territory, Eleanor found herself alone with Kieran on the porch of his sister's house. Sarah had taken Rebecca to visit a new foal in the barn, leaving the two of them to enjoy the mild spring evening. "School year's almost half over," Kieran remarked, leaning against the porch railing. "Planning to stay on for the fall term?" The question caught Eleanor by surprise. She hadn't thought beyond the current school year. I suppose I am. The school board hasn't mentioned anything about replacing me." "They won't," Kieran said confidently. "Everyone's impressed with what you've done with the children. Becky can't stop talking about your lessons. She's a joy to teach." Eleanor smiled, thinking of her enthusiastic pupil. "All of them are, in their way, even the stubborn ones." It was a callback to their earlier conversation, and they both smiled at the reference. "Especially those," Eleanor admitted. "There's nothing more rewarding than watching a resistant student finally engage with learning." Kieran studied her for a moment. "You were born to teach, weren't you? It's not just a job for you." "No," she agreed softly. "It's always been my calling, even when—" She stopped abruptly, realizing she'd been about to mention Thomas. Kieran didn't press. Instead, he changed the subject slightly. "The town's holding a dance next Saturday. Spring celebration. Nothing fancy, but there'll be music, food, maybe even some decent conversation if you're lucky." Eleanor glanced at him, uncertain if this was leading to an invitation. "I'd heard something about it. I thought maybe you might want to go with me." The usually confident Cowboy looked almost boyishly nervous as he made the request. Eleanor's heart skipped a beat. "Mr. O'Malley, Kieran," he corrected gently. "After all these Sunday dinners, I think we can use first names, don't you, Kieran?" she amended, the name feeling strange and intimate on her lips. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate. I'm the school teacher, and I'm a respectable rancher," he finished for her. Nothing scandalous about attending a community dance together. Eleanor hesitated. Part of her wanted very much to accept, while another part, the part still scarred by Thomas's betrayal, recoiled from the risk of opening herself to potential hurt again. "You can think about it," Kieran offered when she didn't immediately respond. "No pressure." Before Eleanor could answer, Sarah and Rebecca returned from the barn, the girl chattering excitedly about the new foal. The moment for private conversation had passed, but Kieran's invitation lingered in Eleanor's mind for the rest of the evening. The following Saturday arrived with Eleanor still undecided about the dance. She'd neither accepted nor declined Kieran's invitation, and he hadn't pressed her for an answer during their brief encounters throughout the week. As she stood before her small mirror, brushing her hair before bed on Friday night, Eleanor confronted her own reflection. The woman who stared back at her looked different from the one who had arrived in Sierra Vista 2 months earlier. There was color in her cheeks from days spent in the western sun, and a certain softness had returned to her expression. "You can't hide forever," she told her reflection. "Is that why you came west? To hide?" The question haunted her through a restless night. When morning came, Eleanor made her decision. She would go to the dance not necessarily with Kieran, but she wouldn't avoid it out of fear either. The dance was being held in the town hall, a building that served multiple functions for the small community. When Eleanor arrived that evening, wearing her best dress, the deep green one that she privately admitted brought out her eyes, the celebration was already in full swing. The hall had been transformed with paper lanterns and spring flowers. A small band of local musicians played lively tunes, and couples twirled around the makeshift dance floor with varying degrees of grace. Tables laden with food and drink lined one wall, while benches provided resting places for those taking a break from dancing. Eleanor had barely stepped through the door when Martha Gardner spotted her and hurried over. "Eleanor, I was beginning to think you weren't coming." "Doesn't she look lovely?" Frederick Thompson, the mercantile owner and Martha's long-standing suitor, though neither would admit it publicly, nodded appreciatively. "Indeed. You'll have dance partners lined up all evening, Miss Sinclair." Eleanor smiled politely, her eyes automatically scanning the room for a tall figure with dark hair and blue eyes. She didn't see Kieran, and a wave of disappointment washed over her, stronger than she would have expected. For the next hour, Eleanor made conversation with the townsfolk, accepted a dance with Dr. Wells and another with Mayor Jenkins, and tried not to wonder if Kieran had decided not to come after her ambivalence about his invitation. She was helping herself to a cup of punch when a familiar voice spoke from behind her. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." Eleanor turned to find Kieran standing there, looking more handsome than any man had a right to in a clean shirt, dark vest, and his best denims. His hair was neatly combed, and he'd clearly taken special care with his appearance. "I wasn't sure if I would," she admitted. "I'm glad you did." His eyes traveled appreciatively over her dress. "You look beautiful, Eleanor." The compliment brought heat to her cheeks. "Thank you." Kieran nodded toward the dance floor where couples were forming for a waltz. "Would you dance with me?" Eleanor hesitated only a moment before placing her punch on the table and taking his offered hand. "I'd like that." Kieran led her to the floor, placing one hand respectfully at her waist while taking her right hand in his left. As the music began, he guided her smoothly into the steps of the waltz, revealing yet another unexpected talent. "You dance well," Eleanor observed, surprised. His eyes twinkled. "Don't sound so shocked. I told you my father was an educated man. He insisted his children learn the social graces even after we came west." "You're full of surprises, Kieran O'Malley." "So are you, Eleanor Sinclair." His hand was warm and steady at her waist, guiding her through the steps with confident ease. "Though you still keep most of yours carefully hidden away." Eleanor looked down, unable to meet his searching gaze. "Perhaps some things are better left in the past. And perhaps some need to be faced before you can truly move forward." His voice was gentle, without judgment. "Whatever happened in Boston, whoever hurt you, they must have been quite something to make a woman like you run so far." Eleanor stiffened in his arms. "I didn't run. I made a choice to start fresh." "Fair enough," he conceded. "But running or choosing, the result is the same if you're still carrying the weight of it with you." The music swelled around them, and Eleanor found herself pressed slightly closer to Kieran as they navigated around other couples. The clean scent of soap and the outdoors clung to him, and she could feel the steady beat of his heart where their chests occasionally brushed. "What if I told you I don't know how to put it down?" she asked quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Kieran's hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "Then I'd say you don't have to do it alone." Eleanor looked up then, meeting his eyes fully. What she saw there, warmth, understanding, and something deeper that made her breath catch, was nearly her undoing. "I was engaged," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "In Boston. To a man I thought I knew. A man I thought loved me." Kieran didn't respond, just continued to guide her around the floor, his eyes never leaving hers, silently encouraging her to continue. "He was charming, educated. My father had just died and I was vulnerable." Eleanor swallowed hard. "We were to be married in June. I found him with another woman 3 weeks before the wedding, in our home, the home we were meant to share after we married." Kieran's jaw tightened, but he remained silent, allowing her to tell her story at her own pace. "It wasn't just the betrayal," Eleanor continued, her voice barely audible above the music. "It was learning that everything had been a lie. He only wanted my inheritance. Once that was secured through marriage, he intended to continue seeing other women. He laughed when I confronted him, actually laughed, and said I was naive to expect fidelity from a man of his appetites." "He sounds like a worthless excuse for a man," Kieran said finally, his voice low and controlled, though Eleanor could sense the anger beneath. "I thought so too." She attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I broke the engagement, sold most of my possessions, and applied for teaching positions as far from Boston as possible. Sierra Vista was the first to respond." The music was drawing to a close, but Eleanor barely noticed, caught up in the relief of finally sharing her story and the intensity of Kieran's gaze. "Thank you for telling me," he said as they came to a stop. His hand remained at her waist, neither of them immediately stepping away as the other dancers began to disperse. "It explains a lot, does it? Why you keep people at a distance, why you're wary of connections." His eyes searched hers. "You lost your faith in love." Eleanor nodded slowly. "I suppose I did." Kieran's hand moved from her waist to gently catch one of hers, his thumb brushing across her knuckles in a touch so light it might have been imaginary. "Then I'll hold it for you," he said softly, "until you want it back." The simple promise, spoken without drama or grand gestures, touched Eleanor more deeply than any flowery declaration could have. Before she could respond, however, the band struck up a livelier tune, and they were surrounded by couples forming sets for a square dance. "Come on," Kieran said, tugging her hand with a smile that chased away the seriousness of the moment. "Let's see if Boston ladies know how to do a proper Western reel." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of music, laughter, and increasingly less formal dancing as the night wore on. Eleanor found herself enjoying the festivities far more than she had anticipated, especially with Kieran at her side for most of it. He was attentive without being possessive, respectful yet warm, And by the time the last dance was called, Eleanor realized with a start that she'd barely thought of Thomas or Boston all evening. As the gathering broke up, Kieran offered to walk her back to the boarding house. The night was clear, with a crescent moon providing just enough light to see by, supplemented by the occasional glow from windows along Main Street. "I had a wonderful time," Eleanor admitted as they strolled. "Thank you for convincing me to come." "I didn't do much convincing. You made up your own mind, still, if you hadn't asked." She let the thought trail off. Kieran glanced down at her. "Would you like to ride out to my ranch tomorrow after church? I've been promising to show you around for weeks." The invitation was innocent enough, but Eleanor hesitated. Going to Sarah's ranch with the family was one thing. Visiting Kieran's ranch alone was quite another. Seeing her hesitation, he added, "Sarah and Becky will be there too. Sunday dinner at my place this week." Relief and a strange twinge of disappointment mingled in Eleanor's chest. "In that case, I'd be delighted." They had reached the boarding house, its windows dark except for the lamp Martha always left burning in the front hall for her boarders. Eleanor paused at the bottom of the steps, turning to face Kieran. "Thank you for the escort, Mr. O'Malley." His eyebrow rose at the reversion to formality. "You're welcome, Miss Sinclair." There was a hint of amusement in his voice, though I thought we'd progress to first names. Eleanor smiled slightly. "Force of habit. Thank you, Kieran. That's better." He took a step closer, his expression turning serious. "Eleanor, what I said before about holding your faith for you, I meant it. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." The gentle declaration hung in the air between them. Eleanor found herself unable to look away from his face, illuminated in the soft moonlight, his eyes reflecting a depth of feeling that both thrilled and terrified her. "Good night, Kieran," she said softly, not trusting herself to say more. He nodded, understanding in his gaze. "Good night, Eleanor. Sleep well." As she climbed the steps to the boarding house, Eleanor felt Kieran's eyes on her back. She turned at the door to find him still standing there, hat in hand, watching to ensure she got inside safely. The gesture, simple and protective, warmed her in ways she couldn't quite explain. That night, as she prepared for bed, Eleanor realized that something fundamental had shifted. In sharing her story with Kieran, she had released some of the power it held over her. For the first time since leaving Boston, she felt as though she could breathe fully, without the constant weight of her past pressing down on her chest. Kieran O'Malley's ranch, which Eleanor visited the following day, proved to be everything she had imagined a Western cattle operation would be, and much more. Unlike Sarah's more modest spread, Kieran's ranch sprawled across several thousand acres of prime grazing land, with a main house that, while not grand by Eastern standards, was impressive for the territory. "You've done well for yourself," Eleanor observed as Kieran showed her and the Jenkins around the property. "Been lucky," he replied modestly. "Had some good years, made some smart investments. The railroad coming through helped a lot easier to get cattle to market now." The ranch house itself was surprisingly comfortable, with solid furniture, bookshelves filled with an eclectic collection of volumes, and windows positioned to catch the best views of the surrounding countryside. It was clearly a bachelor's home, lacking some of the feminine touches that made Sarah's house feel homey, but it was well kept and inviting nonetheless. "No housekeeper?" Eleanor asked as Kieran led them into a spacious kitchen where preparations for dinner were already underway. "Just Mrs. Ramirez, who comes in twice a week," he grinned. "I do for myself most days. Shocking, I know a man who can cook and clean." "Uncle Kieran makes the best flapjacks," Rebecca declared, already investigating a pot simmering on the stove. "Among my many talents," he said with a wink at Eleanor that made her cheeks warm. Dinner was a lively affair, with Rebecca dominating the conversation with tales of school and ranch life. Eleanor found herself watching Kieran as he interacted with his niece and sister, noting the easy affection between them and the genuine interest he took in everything they said. After the meal, Sarah insisted on handling the cleanup, shooing Kieran and Eleanor out onto the wide porch that wrapped around the house. The late afternoon sun cast a golden glow over the landscape, and in the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on gentle slopes. "It's beautiful here," Eleanor said, leaning against the porch railing. "Peaceful," Kieran nodded, coming to stand beside her. "That's what I love about it. After the noise and chaos of New York and then the war, this place is a balm to the soul." "You were in the war." Eleanor hadn't considered that possibility, though given his age it made sense. "Union Army. Enlisted when I was 17, fought till Appomattox." His expression grew distant. "Saw things no boy should see. Did things I'm not proud of. When it was over, I couldn't go back to New York. Needed open spaces, clean air. And you found it here, eventually. Wandered for a while first. Worked as a ranch hand, tried my luck at mining, even rode for the Pony Express for a spell before it shut down." He smiled slightly at her surprised expression. "Told you I was full of surprises." "That you did." Eleanor studied his profile, seeing the man behind the charming cowboy exterior with new clarity. "You've lived quite a life, Kieran O'Malley. It's had its moments." He turned to face her, his expression growing more serious. "But these past few months, since a certain schoolteacher arrived in Sierra Vista, they've been among the best." Eleanor's breath caught at the simple declaration. "Kieran, I'm not pushing," he assured her quickly. "Just stating a fact. You've brought something to this town, to Becky's life. To my life. Something good." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, and Eleanor found herself unable to dismiss his words or retreat behind her usual defenses. "You've done the same for me," she admitted softly. "When I came here, I was numb. I didn't expect to feel anything again, certainly not." She trailed off, unwilling or unable to name the emotions that had been growing within her. "Not what?" Kieran prompted gently, taking a step closer. Eleanor shook her head, suddenly afraid of the intensity of what she was feeling. "It doesn't matter. I should check on Rebecca and Sarah." She turned to go, but Kieran's hand on her arm stopped her. "Eleanor." Just her name, spoken with such tenderness that she couldn't help but meet his gaze. "It matters. You matter." For a long moment, they stood there, connected by his light touch on her arm and the unspoken understanding that flowed between them. Eleanor could feel her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble under the steady warmth of his blue eyes. The moment was broken by Rebecca bursting onto the porch. "Uncle Kieran, Miss Sinclair, Mama says it's time for pie." Kieran's hand fell away from Eleanor's arm, but his eyes held hers for a moment longer. "We'll be right there, Becky," he said, not looking away from Eleanor's face. As the days stretched into weeks and spring blossomed into early summer, Eleanor found herself drawn more and more into Kieran's world. Sunday dinners at either his ranch or Sarah's became a cherished ritual, and she began to accept his invitations to other outings: a picnic by the creek, a trip to the neighboring town for supplies, an evening listening to a traveling musician who had stopped in Sierra Vista. Each encounter deepened her understanding of the complex man behind the cowboy exterior. Kieran was educated and well-read, with opinions on everything from politics to literature. He was kind to those in need, respected by his peers, and adored by his niece. And he looked at Eleanor in a way no man, not even Thomas, ever had, as if seeing straight through to her soul and finding value in what he discovered there. By late May, with the school term nearing its end, Eleanor had to admit to herself that she was falling in love with Kieran O'Malley. The realization terrified her. Despite the healing months in Sierra Vista, despite Kieran's consistent thoughtfulness and respect, part of her remained convinced that opening her heart again would only lead to pain. The last day of school arrived with mixed emotions for Eleanor. She was proud of her students' progress and looking forward to a summer of exploring more of the territory. But she would miss the daily routine and the children's eager faces. As she was closing up the schoolhouse after dismissing the class, she heard the now familiar sound of hoofbeats approaching. Looking up, she saw Kieran dismounting from Thunder, his expression unusually serious. "Kieran, is everything all right?" She moved to meet him, concern evident in her voice. "Got some news," he said, removing his hat. "Telegram came in this morning. The railroad's putting in a new spur line to connect to the mines up north. They're offering top dollar for right-of-way across some of the ranches in the area." "Including yours?" Eleanor asked. He nodded. "Mine and Sarah's both. It's good money enough to make some real improvements, expand the herds, maybe even build that new barn Sarah's been wanting." "That's wonderful," Eleanor smiled, but it faded when she saw his still serious expression. "Isn't it?" Kieran ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she'd come to recognize as a sign of his discomfort. "The railroad man, he wants me to go to San Francisco to sign the final contracts. Said there are some complications with the exact route that need to be worked out with the engineers there." "I see." Eleanor felt a strange hollowness forming in her stomach. "When would you leave?" "Tomorrow morning. Early stage to Tucson, then the train west." Kieran's eyes met hers directly. "I'd be gone at least 2 weeks, maybe longer." 2 weeks. It wasn't so very long. Yet the prospect of not seeing Kieran for that period made Eleanor realize just how deeply he had become woven into the fabric of her daily life. "Well," she said, striving for a lightness she didn't feel, "I'm sure San Francisco will be a pleasant change from our little town." Kieran stepped closer, his gaze intent. "Eleanor, I want you to come with me." The request was so unexpected that Eleanor could only stare at him. "To San Francisco." "But I can't possibly." "Why not?" His voice was earnest. "School's out for the summer. You've talked about wanting to see more of the West, and I—" He paused, taking a breath. "I don't want to be away from you for that long." The naked honesty in his admission sent a flutter through Eleanor's chest. "Kieran, it wouldn't be proper. A single woman traveling with a man, staying in hotels. We could get separate rooms," he said quickly. "Or you could stay with my cousin and her husband. They have a house in the city." Everything would be completely respectable. Eleanor hesitated. The idea of seeing San Francisco, a city she'd heard so much about, was tempting, and the thought of 2 weeks without Kieran's company was more distressing than she wanted to admit. "What about Rebecca and Sarah?" she asked, grasping for practical concerns. "They'll miss our Sunday dinners." Kieran's lips quirked in a half-smile. "They'll survive. In fact, Sarah's the one who suggested I ask you to come along." "She did." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "She did." Kieran took another step closer, close enough now that Eleanor could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes. "Eleanor, I know you're still cautious. I know you've been hurt. But I'm asking you to take a chance, not on forever, just on 2 weeks in San Francisco with a man who cares deeply for you." The sincerity in his voice and eyes was Eleanor's undoing. In that moment, she realized that her fear of being hurt again had to be weighed against the fear of missing out on something potentially wonderful. "Yes," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'll come with you." The smile that broke across Kieran's face was like sunrise after a long night. "You mean it?" Eleanor nodded, her own lips curving upward in response to his evident joy. "I do. Though I have no idea what to pack for San Francisco." Kieran laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet schoolyard. "Pack light. I hear they have shops in the city." His expression softened. "Thank you, Eleanor, for trusting me enough to say yes." In that moment, with the late afternoon sun gilding his dark hair and his eyes bright with happiness, Eleanor wanted nothing more than to step into his arms. "Instead," she said, "I should go pack if we're leaving at dawn." "I'll pick you up at 5, he promised. "And Eleanor," he reached out, his fingers lightly brushing a strand of hair from her cheek in a touch so gentle it made her breath catch. "You won't regret this." As Eleanor walked back to the boarding house, her mind whirling with plans and possibilities, she realized that for the first time since Thomas's betrayal, she was allowing herself to hope for something beyond mere contentment. The thought was both exhilarating and terrifying. Martha was predictably scandalized at first by Eleanor's announcement that she would be traveling to San Francisco with Kieran. But Sarah's arrival at the boarding house an hour later with assurances about the propriety of the arrangements, and the presence of Kieran's relatives in the city, eventually won the older woman over. "Well, I suppose if you're staying with family," Martha conceded, "and it is a fine opportunity to see San Francisco." Eleanor spent the evening packing her few good dresses and personal items, all the while trying to calm the butterflies in her stomach. Was she being foolish? Had she learned nothing from her experience with Thomas? But Kieran wasn't Thomas, she knew that deep in her bones. In the months she'd known him, he had never once given her reason to doubt his integrity or his genuine regard for her. If anything, he had been almost too patient, too understanding of her need for caution. True to his word, Kieran arrived at the boarding house precisely at 5 o'clock the next morning. He helped load Eleanor's trunk onto the buggy that would take them to the stage station, his manner polite, but with an underlying current of excitement that matched her own. The journey to San Francisco was long but not unpleasant. The stage-coach to Tucson was crowded and dusty, but Kieran kept Eleanor entertained with stories of his early days in the territory. The train journey west was more comfortable, allowing them to enjoy the changing landscape as they traversed desert mountains, and finally, the lush valleys of California. Throughout the journey, Kieran was attentive without being overbearing, respectful of Eleanor's personal space while making it clear through small gestures, a hand at her elbow, a concerned inquiry about her comfort, the procurement of refreshments at stops that her well-being was his primary concern. By the time they reached San Francisco, Eleanor felt more at ease with him than ever before. The city itself was a revelation, bustling, cosmopolitan, with elegant buildings alongside crude wooden structures, evidence of its rapid growth from Gold Rush camp to sophisticated metropolis. Kieran's cousin Elizabeth and her husband Richard welcomed them warmly to their home on Nob Hill, a fashionable district with views of the bay. Elizabeth, a vivacious woman a few years older than Eleanor, immediately took her under her wing. "Kieran's told us so much about you in his letters," she confided as she showed Eleanor to her room. "I was beginning to think you might be too perfect to be real." Eleanor blushed. "He wrote about me." Elizabeth's smile was knowing. "Extensively, though he failed to mention how pretty you are." The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. While Kieran attended business meetings with the railroad executives during the days, Elizabeth took Eleanor sightseeing to the markets of Chinatown, the busy wharves, the grand hotels and department stores. In the evenings, the four of them would dine together, sometimes at home, sometimes at one of the city's fine restaurants. Occasionally, they attended the theater or musical performances, experiences that Eleanor, who had loved the arts in Boston, particularly treasured. Throughout it all, Eleanor was acutely aware of Kieran's presence beside her, his genuine interest in her opinions, his quiet attentiveness, the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her. She found herself opening up more, sharing stories of her childhood in Boston, her dreams of being a teacher, even some of the pain of losing her parents. One evening, toward the end of their stay, Kieran suggested a walk along the waterfront after dinner. The night was clear and mild, with a slight breeze carrying the scent of the sea. They strolled in companionable silence for a while, watching the lights of boats in the harbor and listening to the distant sounds of the city. "I have to thank you," Eleanor said finally. Kieran glanced down at her. "For what?" "For convincing me to come with you. For—" She hesitated, searching for the right words. "For being patient with me. For understanding why I've been so cautious." Kieran stopped walking, turning to face her. In the lamplight, his expression was serious but tender. "Eleanor, you don't need to thank me for treating you with the respect you deserve." "Perhaps not," she acknowledged. "But I want you to know that I see what you've been doing, holding my faith for me, as you put it. And I think—" She took a deep breath. "I think I might be ready to take it back." Kieran's eyes widened slightly. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel rushed." Eleanor smiled at his concern. "I'm not rushed. If anything, I've been stubbornly slow, holding on to fear because it felt safer than risking hope." Kieran took her hands in his touch warm and gentle. "Hope is always worth the risk, Eleanor, but only when you're truly ready." "I am." The certainty in her voice surprised even her. "These past 2 weeks seeing you in different settings, watching how you treat others, how you've respected my boundaries while still showing me how you feel. It's helped me see clearly what I've known in my heart for some time." "And what is that?" Kieran's voice was hushed, as if afraid to break the spell of the moment. Eleanor met his gaze steadily. "That you're a good man, Kieran O'Malley, the best man I've ever known. And that I've fallen in love with you." The words, once spoken, seemed to hang in the air between them. For a moment, Kieran was perfectly still, his eyes searching hers as if to confirm the truth of what she'd said. Then, slowly, reverently, he raised one hand to cup her cheek. "Eleanor Sinclair," he said softly, "I have loved you since the day you stood up, covered in dust, and refused my hand because you were determined to get up on your own." A small laugh escaped her. "That's not very romantic." "It is to me." His thumb brushed gently across her cheekbone. "Your strength, your independence, your determination to stand on your own 2 feet, those are the things I fell in love with. Along with your kindness, your passion for teaching, and yes, those remarkable green eyes." Eleanor felt warmth spread through her at his words. Here, finally, was a man who loved her not despite her independence but because of it. A man who saw her clearly and valued what he saw. "May I kiss you, Eleanor?" Kieran asked, his voice husky. In answer, Eleanor rose on her tiptoes, closing the distance between them. The kiss was gentle at first, a tentative exploration, but deepened as Kieran's arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer. Eleanor's hands found their way to his shoulders, then to the nape of his neck, fingers threading through his hair. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Kieran rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for a very long time," he murmured. "Me too," Eleanor admitted, surprising herself with her honesty. Kieran grinned, the boyish expression lightening the intensity of the moment. "Does this mean I can court you properly when we get back to Sierra Vista? Take you on real outings, not just family dinners?" Eleanor laughed. "I think the entire town already believes you're courting me. Martha Gardner has been making wedding plans since our first dance." "Smart woman, Martha." Kieran brushed a strand of hair from Eleanor's face, his expression growing serious again. "I don't want to rush you, Eleanor. We have all the time in the world." The sincerity in his voice touched her deeply. "Thank you for that, for understanding that I might need time. Always." He offered her his arm, Shall we head back? Elizabeth will send out a search party if we're gone too long." As they walked back toward Nob Hill, Eleanor felt lighter than she had in years. The fear and distrust that had been her constant companions since Thomas's betrayal hadn't vanished entirely, but they had receded, making room for something new and infinitely more precious hope. The journey back to Sierra Vista seemed shorter somehow, brightened by the new understanding between them. Kieran was still respectful, mindful of propriety, but there were small changes, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than necessary, shared glances filled with private meaning, quiet conversations as they watched the landscape roll by. Upon their return, life resumed its familiar patterns, but with subtle differences. Kieran now called at the boarding house regularly, taking Eleanor on proper outings, rides in the countryside, picnics by the creek, even a day trip to Tucson to see a theatrical performance. Their Sunday dinners with Sarah and Rebecca continued, but now there was an acknowledged bond between them that added a new dimension to these family gatherings. Rebecca, especially, seemed delighted by the development, her young face glowing with pleasure whenever she saw her uncle and teacher together. Summer passed in a golden haze of happiness for Eleanor. She helped at the church's summer school program in the mornings, spent afternoons exploring the territory with Kieran or assisting Sarah with ranch chores, and evenings sitting on the boarding house porch, sometimes reading alone, sometimes in quiet conversation with Kieran when he was in town. As August drew to a close and the new school term approached, Eleanor found herself contemplating the future with a sense of anticipation rather than dread. She loved Sierra Vista, loved her teaching position, loved the community that had embraced her so warmly. And she loved Kieran O'Malley with a depth and certainty that no longer frightened her. It was on a warm evening in late August, as they sat on the porch of Kieran's ranch house after Sunday dinner, that he turned to her with unusual seriousness. "I have something to ask you," he said, taking her hand in his. Eleanor's heart quickened. "Yes, the school board met yesterday. They've offered me a position teaching advanced classes for the older students, particularly in mathematics and sciences." Of all the things Eleanor had expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. "Teaching? You?" Kieran chuckled at her surprise. "Don't sound so shocked. I did mention my father was a teacher. I've always had an interest in education, and with the railroad money, I can afford to hire a proper foreman to handle the day-to-day ranch operations." "Kieran, that's wonderful." Eleanor squeezed his hand, genuinely pleased. "You'll be an excellent teacher. The students will respect you and your practical knowledge will be invaluable. I'm glad you approve." His smile faded slightly, replaced by a more serious expression. "But that's not actually what I wanted to ask you." He shifted, turning to face her more directly, still holding her hand in his. "Eleanor, these past few months have been the happiest of my life. You've brought light and joy and purpose into my world in ways I never expected." Eleanor felt her throat tighten with emotion. "You've done the same for me." Kieran's eyes were intensely blue in the fading light. "When you came to Sierra Vista, you'd lost your faith in love. You gave me the privilege of holding it for you until you were ready to reclaim it. I hope I believe that you have." "I have," Eleanor whispered. "Thanks to you." Kieran reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. Eleanor's breath caught as he opened it to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a single emerald, flanked by tiny diamonds. "Eleanor Sinclair," Kieran said, his voice steady despite the emotion visible in his eyes. "I love you with all that I am. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears welled in Eleanor's eyes as she looked from the ring to Kieran's beloved face. "Yes," she said simply. "With all my heart, yes." Kieran's smile was radiant as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the emerald catching the last rays of the setting sun. "It's beautiful," Eleanor murmured, admiring the way the stone matched her eyes. "I had it sent from San Francisco," Kieran admitted. "Been carrying it around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." Eleanor laughed softly. "And you chose now, with dishwater hands from helping Sarah with the cleaning up." "I chose now because you've never looked more beautiful," Kieran said with such sincerity that Eleanor's heart swelled. Dishwater hands and all. He leaned forward, capturing her lips in a kiss that held all the promise of their future together. Eleanor melted into it, her arms winding around his neck as she returned the kiss with equal fervor. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Eleanor rested her head against Kieran's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "When shall we be married?" she asked. "Whenever you wish," Kieran replied, his fingers gently stroking her hair. "Tomorrow, next month, next year, I'll wait as long as you need." Eleanor smiled against his chest. "Not too long, I think. Perhaps during the Christmas break. That would give us time to plan and my students wouldn't miss too many lessons." Kieran chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly beneath her ear. "Always the dedicated teacher. Christmas it is." As the sun set over the Arizona horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple, Eleanor felt a sense of completion she had never expected to find when she first stepped off the train in Sierra Vista. She had come west to escape pain, to start fresh, never imagining that she would find not just a new beginning but a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. "Thank you," she said softly. Kieran looked down at her. "For what?" "For holding my faith when I couldn't. For being patient. For loving me even when I was determined not to be loved." Kieran's arms tightened around her. "Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done, Eleanor, and the most rewarding." As darkness settled over the ranch, the first stars appearing in the vast western sky, Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that the path that had led her to this place, to this man, had been the right one. The pain of her past had shaped her but no longer defined her. The future, with Kieran by her side, stretched before them full of promise and possibility. And her faith in love, once lost, but carefully tended by the good man who held her in his arms, had returned stronger and more resilient than ever before. Eleanor and Kieran were married on Christmas Eve in the Sierra Vista church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Snow had fallen the night before, a rare occurrence in that part of Arizona territory, blanketing the town in white and lending a magical quality to the day. Eleanor wore a gown of ivory satin that Sarah and Amelia Winters had helped her make, with a lace veil that had been Elizabeth's, sent from San Francisco as a wedding gift. Kieran, resplendent in a new suit, waited for her at the altar with an expression of such joy and love that it brought tears to the eyes of many in attendance. Rebecca served as flower girl, solemnly scattering rose petals, specially ordered from Tucson, down the aisle before her teacher. Sarah stood as Eleanor's matron of honor, while Richard, who had traveled from San Francisco with Elizabeth for the occasion, served as Kieran's best man. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with Reverend Phillips speaking eloquently about the journey that had brought the couple together. When it came time for the vows, Kieran's strong voice filled the church, unwavering as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Eleanor for all the days of his life. When it was Eleanor's turn, she looked up into Kieran's blue eyes and spoke from the heart. "I came to Sierra Vista having lost my faith in love," she said. "You promised to hold it for me until I was ready to take it back. Today, I not only reclaim that faith but return it to you tenfold. I promise to love you, honor you, and walk beside you through whatever life may bring from this day forward. There wasn't a dry eye in the church as Kieran slipped a simple gold band onto Eleanor's finger to join her engagement ring. When Reverend Phillips pronounced them man and wife, Kieran's kiss was gentle but filled with promise, drawing cheers and applause from their friends and neighbors. The celebration afterward, held in the town hall, lasted well into the night. The entire community turned out to wish the newlyweds well, bringing dishes to share and gifts for their new life together. There was music and dancing, with Kieran and Eleanor opening the festivities with the same waltz they had first danced together at the spring celebration. "Happy Mrs. O'Malley," Kieran murmured as he guided her around the floor. The new name sent a thrill through Eleanor. "Completely, Mr. O'Malley." She looked up at him with a teasing smile. "Though I suppose I should get used to calling you Professor O'Malley now that you're a teacher." Kieran laughed, the sound warming her heart as it always did. "I think just Kieran will do fine in private." As midnight approached, the couple slipped away to begin their journey to San Francisco, where they would spend their honeymoon as guests of Richard and Elizabeth. The train wouldn't depart until morning, but Kieran had prepared a surprise. The ranch house, which would be their home, had been specially readied for their wedding night. When they arrived, Eleanor gasped in delight. The house had been transformed, fresh paint, new curtains that she recognized as Sarah's handiwork, and furniture that blended Kieran's existing pieces with several new additions, including a writing desk positioned near the best window, clearly intended for her use. "When did you do all this?" she asked, turning in a slow circle to take it all in. "Been working on it for weeks, whenever you were busy with school or wedding preparations." Kieran looked pleased with her reaction. Sarah helped, of course, and Martha gave her opinion on what a proper lady's home should include. Eleanor laughed at the thought of Martha Gardner instructing Kieran on household requirements. "It's perfect," she said sincerely. "Absolutely perfect." Kieran took her hands in his. "There's one more thing." He led her to what had been a storage room off the main living area. Opening the door, he revealed a small but cozy space filled with books, comfortable seating, and a child-sized desk. "A schoolroom?" Eleanor asked, puzzled. Kieran nodded. "For now. Later. Perhaps a nursery." His voice held a question, his eyes searching hers for a reaction. Eleanor's heart swelled with love for this man who thought so carefully about their future together. "A wonderful idea," she said softly, "for both purposes." The look of joy on Kieran's face was all the confirmation she needed that she had made the right choice in coming west, in opening her heart again, in accepting this good man's love. Later, as they lay in the new feather bed that had been another of Kieran's surprises, Eleanor rested her head on his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you, Kieran O'Malley," she whispered. "More than I ever thought possible." His arms tightened around her, his lips pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "And I love you, Eleanor O'Malley, forever and always." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's embrace, Eleanor reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had traveled west to escape pain, to rebuild her life in solitude. Instead, she had found a community, a purpose, and a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. The faith she had lost had been returned to her, strengthened by the patience and devotion of the remarkable man who now shared her life. And in the years to come, as they built their home, welcomed children, and grew old together under the vast Arizona skies, that faith would never waver again. For Eleanor had learned the most important lesson of all. True love wasn't about grand gestures or passionate declarations, but about the quiet strength of a heart that says, "I'll hold this for you until you're ready to take it back." And in Kieran O'Malley, She had found just such a heart steady, patient, and endlessly loving. It was everything she had never dared to hope for, and everything she would cherish for all the days of her life.